Hi everyone, Simon here. Today we are going to learn about how to start your app business. So you've got a mobile app, you want to commercialize it and make some money, good idea. We're going to work out, or I'm going to give you some information about how you should do that. So let's get into it. First thing you need to know is that if you are going to put out an app, it's most likely going to be Android or an Apple app, iOS app, and so therefore you're going to be bound by the Apple and Google Play terms and conditions when you post your app into their respective stores. There's also the Microsoft store, but that doesn't get as much traction, so we probably won't talk about that too much. So the thing to bear in mind is that obviously those companies, being those companies, they have their own terms and conditions that benefit them and not you. You can use, I think with Apple, you can use some default terms and conditions, but I would not do that because they will not protect you as much as your own terms and conditions would. So just bear that in mind as we step through this. Wrong way. So when you are going to go live with your app, you need some things that go with it. For instance, you need some terms and conditions, an end user license agreement, but that should be built into the terms and conditions just to make it easier. And you also potentially want a privacy policy. When I say potentially, for a lot of businesses, privacy policies don't apply, in that you don't need one if your turnover is less than 3 million, unless you are operating in certain bespoke fields like the health space. So if you're operating in the health space, or your app is about health and you're collecting information about people's health, then you definitely need a privacy policy. Otherwise, most businesses don't actually need them, but you can link them to your terms and conditions when you lodge them in the App Store and with Google Play, and that is actually a good way to show Apple and Google that your app is, I was going to say fair income, but you get the point. It's a bona fide and legitimate app, so it is a good thing to do. Plus, it also gives your clients or users some satisfaction that they know what you are going to do with their information once they provide it to you. So they'll give you things like their name, their email address, maybe obviously their phone number, and it'd be good if you can tell them what you're going to do with that information. Okay, so let's move on. Yes, your app does need terms and conditions, and that is so you can, as far as possible, reduce your risk and protect yourself. The things, or the sorts of things that your app terms and conditions should specify are things like the fees, any rules that apply to people. So if you subscribe to an app, what are the obligations on you? For instance, you might want to have obligations about posting material, that you can't post material that's, defamatory or contains, say, pornographic images, all that sort of stuff. You could also prohibit people from sending or posting links to other websites, or if they do post a link, and if you allow that, then you can basically ensure in your terms and conditions that you have no liability for any links that are posted by users of the app. Moving on, you can then, and you should have an indemnity in the app so that the user of the app indemnifies you for any loss they cause you because of their use of the app. You should also limit your liability. So if your app causes loss to someone else, you should look to limit the liability of you, or your liability, in the terms and conditions. And also the T's and C's are a good way of protecting your copyright and intellectual property, because you can set out in the terms and conditions of use that there is a license for them to use your IP, being the copyright that subsists in the app, and you want to be able to specify to people what those usage rights are, and can the license be revoked, etc. You probably want more mundane things in your terms and conditions as well, things like when or how you can cancel a customer's account. For instance, if they don't pay money, if it's a subscription-based thing, or their conduct is such that you don't want to have them on your app, then you should spell out or specify all of those sorts of things in the terms and conditions. And it's always good to have the governing law and choice of law courts in there, so that in the event a dispute does arise, you want to be able to use a court system that's close to you, and that means it'll be cheapest for you as opposed to the other party. Okay, so do you need terms and conditions for your app? Definitely yes. Does your app need a disclaimer? This is a definite yes as well, and that should be built into the terms and conditions. And so that is a sentence or a couple of sentences that will disclaim any liability that you have where a user uses your app. It might not sound like a big deal, but it is a big deal in the sense that something small like a disclaimer can go a long way to substantially reducing your business risk. And so basically, why wouldn't you do it? You'd actually be a little bit mad if you didn't. Anyway, that's just my view of things. So let's keep going. So an end user license agreement let me just break it down for you. Most apps, when they are created, rely on copyright. So the intellectual property in the app is protected by copyright. You can protect the name of the app via a trademark. And if the app incorporates some new and fancy process, you could get the process protected by a patent. But because your app is based in copyright and you should own the intellectual property rights then in the app, you want to, or you need to, allow parties the right to use your IP when they use the app. So you'd want to have an end user license agreement. It should be just a component of the terms and conditions, but the EULA, end user license agreement, will specify the rights to use that you are giving someone. And that's important so that it lets everyone know that you are maintaining the control of your IP. And if any disputes arise around it, then you want to be able to have the ability to terminate that license and stop users from using the app. As I said, whilst I have created this as a separate slide, it is best to just have that end user license agreement built into the terms and conditions, because that way it's easier for users to sign up to use your app, because they will only have to tick, one or two boxes in terms of agreeing to a license or a right to use, as opposed to 4, 5, or 6 boxes. So generally, people who start using your app would sign up and agree to 2 things: the terms and conditions and the privacy policy. Okay. So this should be common knowledge, but it may not be to a lot of people. And that is simply, if you want to bind someone to your terms and conditions, because your terms and conditions are a contract, if you want to bind someone to the terms and conditions of your contract, you need to bring it to their attention before they do anything. So before they start using the app, you have to bring the terms and conditions to their attention, and you need them to take a proactive step to agree to those terms and conditions. Now, the proactive step that they take could be something like ticking a box to say they agree to the terms and conditions. Even better, you can force people to scroll down the length of your terms and conditions, and you don't actually allow them to tick a box saying they accept the terms and conditions until such time as they've scrolled to the bottom. So that means they've got to scroll to the bottom and then tick a box. And if you want to go even further, you can actually force people to scroll. You can also force people to tick boxes next to certain important clauses as they scroll down the terms and conditions. And then you can also compel them to tick the box at the bottom saying that they agree to all the terms and conditions. Courts have found that the more proactive steps that users are required to take to show their acceptance and agreement of terms and conditions, then the more likely the terms and conditions are found to be binding. So it's in your interest to at least put someone to the effort of ticking a box, but just consider whether you want to do more in terms of compel them to scroll to the bottom and then tick, or tick boxes as they scroll and then tick a final box at the bottom. Okay. Does my app need a privacy policy? Well, I alluded to this at the start. Under Australian law, unless you're collecting information in the health and medical fields, and there are a couple of others, but if your app is in the health and medical fields, then you will definitely need a privacy policy. Otherwise, unless your turnover is 3 million or more, you do not need one. But as I say, it gives your users comfort and a sense of professionalism if they can see that your privacy policy exists, and there is one. So I think it's actually a good idea to get one, and they're generally not expensive documents. So it is a wise thing to do. So now I just wanted to talk to you about the app creation process, which is, and there are numerous questions that arise here, but one of them is, how do I stop someone from stealing my app idea? So let's say you've got an app idea and you're wanting to get someone to develop it, like an app developer. Then the best thing is you can get them, the app developer, to sign up to a non-disclosure or confidentiality agreement, which prohibits them from disclosing any information you provide to them about your app. Can also be good to provide this to other parties, like any partners you want to go into business with. So when you're discussing whether you want to go into business with someone, not a bad idea to have a confidentiality agreement in place. With investors, you can ask them to sign, but a professional investor, probably sees, 10 to 100 potential ideas each week, and they won't want to sign any NDAs. And so don't be too concerned if an investor does not want to sign. But let me preface that by saying I am assuming that the investor is a professional investor and that's all they do. If it's just, the friends of your mum and dad or something like that, it's not a bad idea to get them to sign an NDA. But if you're dealing with a professional investor, I wouldn't be so concerned because they're too busy doing other things to worry about your little app. But yes, good idea also for app developers when you're having those initial discussions with them as to whether you want to engage an app developer. It's a good idea at that stage to have a confidentiality agreement in place to help protect your app and your app ID. So how do you protect your app? Well, easily enough in Australia, the laws in relation to copyright protect your app. So as soon as you put your app ID and the app in writing, then it automatically attracts copyright and you do not have to do anything. Like you do not have to seek registration. You do not have to do anything like that. So once your app's created, I would whack a copyright symbol on there, the year that the app was created, and also the party that owns that copyright. So your business name or your company name, copyright, and then the year. So in other words, on the bottom of this slide, I could claim copyright and I could put copyright, the contract company 2020. One thing to bear in mind is that inserting that copyright symbol is just an evidentiary step, meaning it's just a step you're putting out or showing the world at large that you are asserting copyright in the information. If you don't have the copyright symbol, that's not fatal. It just means that if you ever were sued or wanted to sue someone, you'd potentially just have to show that you'd taken steps to protect your copyright. Anyway, not a big deal, but it's just safer to do it than not do it. So the next thing to talk about is, should you trademark your app name and your logo? Look, the answer is yes, if you believe your app is going to get large and be commercially valuable. I would get a trademark for the app and even for the logo. You can get 2 trademarks. You can get just a word mark for the name, or you could get a logo trademark, or you could get a logo trademark that includes the name, but that's just one trademark application. what I would do is that I would start off by not having a registered trademark. Just put the initials TM next to the name, which gives the world or tells the world at large that you are asserting a trademark, a common law trademark in that name. And that's a free thing to do. If your app becomes commercially successful, I would then definitely look to register the app as a trademark. But that's just my view. If you think it's going to go gangbusters from the start, then by all means, lodge a trademark application, protect the app name. It's the safest thing to do, but I'm just trying to give you the reality of what I see is that a lot of people who go into the app development business don't have a lot of money. And to me, this is one area you could potentially save some money on and just flag it as something you may need to do in the future if and when the app goes really well. So patents will protect the process and the any methods or new inventions that the app performs. I think it's actually quite rare to get patent applications in relation to an app because really it's a patent application in relation to software. They are a bit harder to get. I actually spent 3 or 4 years working in a patent attorney firm. It can be done, but I would bundle this in the same category as a trademark, which is don't do it at first instance, but with a patent, you've actually got to patent it up front before you put it out in the public domain. So look, maybe I'll say it this way. If you think you've created a new and novel invention, then by all means ring a patent attorney and see if it's worth patenting, because you will need to get that put in place before you go out to market with your patent, because as soon as your patent or the concept in your patent is in the public domain, then you lose rights to patent things. So look, talk to a patent attorney at first instance before you go out with your app, see what they think. I would stress that if there's a way to potentially keep the novel or inventive step in your patent secret, in your app secret, then I'd probably err on the side of caution of doing that. In other words, so take Google as an example. If the Google search platform was just an app, no one really knows how Google or all the algorithms that Google has and what runs in the background when you do a search on Google, right? And so if Google went and lodged a patent application, they have to tell the world at large what all those algorithms do, right? Whereas at the moment, if you go on Google and you do a search, you don't know what's happening, and they're not going to tell you what's happening. And they change it because that's what they do with these, Google updates that happen every sort of, once to twice a year. So what I'd be suggesting is if you do have a novel and inventive step in your app, you might consider not disclosing it and just being a little secretive with what it does and how it works. And that way you'll have protection for your concept, for more than 20 years, which is better than a patent. Anyway, just something to think about. Okay, let's move on and talk about app development. So, unless you're blessed with technical skills, most likely you have to pay someone to develop the app for you. I would strongly suggest an app development contract. The reason I would strongly suggest it is because of IP. So in Australia, the common law position, meaning judge-made law on the subject of IP where it's created for you by someone else, is that where that third party creates something for you, that third party actually owns the IP, but because they've created it for you and you've paid for it, you are then granted a right to use the IP for the purposes for which it was created. However, you can overturn that by having a written agreement that basically says, whatever Mr. Developer creates for me, I own all the intellectual property rights in that creation. Now, what some app developers will do is that most app developers actually agree to the client owning the IP. Their issue is they just want to get paid. So most app development agreements that I've seen will say something like, you, Mr. Client, will own the IP in, each milestone, as and when you pay for each milestone, and once the entire app has been paid for, you will then own all intellectual property rights in the app. And that protects the developer, so they get paid, and it also protects you, and that is a fair outcome. But what other things should be in the app development contract? Well, things that you'll see on this slide: the specifications, how much it is, when is the app developer to be paid? Is it at the end of every fortnight? Is it at the end of every month? Is it dependent upon them hitting milestones and developing certain things? There should be a dispute resolution process in the contract, so if anything goes wrong, what's the problem, or how does it get resolved? And I have talked about IP and how that is probably the fundamental reason you want one of these app development agreements. And also confidentiality. You can compel the app developer to keep the concept and the work they're doing for you confidential. So why do you need an app development contract? So as I said before, the main reason you want one is because you want to ensure that you will own the IP in whatever they develop for you, right? And that is the biggest reason you want a development contract. But in saying that, if your app is lengthy, it's going to take a long time to develop, it's complex, then you will want to ensure some sort of certainty around deliverables, what they're doing, the specifications, the pricing, and all that sort of stuff. And that's why you want one of these app development agreements. So what are the risks? Well, if you don't put in place an app development contract, then as I mentioned with IP, there is some risk. In fact, it's quite a large risk that you will not own the IP in the app that you've paid for. The developer will. You will have a right to use it though. But where this could become a problem is that if you develop a successful app and you want to sell the app and the app business, then any investor could be turned off by the fact that you actually don't own the rights to sell it. You could transfer the license, but it wouldn't be as valuable as transferring ownership of the intellectual property. Also, other issues could arise in relation to price. There could be discussions or disputes about price and what you've paid for and what you should pay for. And the contract goes a long way to, I've said it here as anticipating dissatisfaction, but it's actually the opposite, which is it can go a long way to ensuring satisfaction with the product or the app that's been developed. So in other words, an app development contract helps give you some certainty about what the developer is developing for you. So it helps them understand exactly what they have to do. And it also helps clarify for you what exactly you want the app to do. So it's an important thing to do. And that's why I'd recommend it. How can I make sure I own the code for my app? Well, the code in the app is protected by copyright. Copyright is created as soon as the words are written down. But you want to make sure that that copyright is assigned to you, and that needs to be done in Australia in writing. And that is the simple reason why you want a binding contract between the app developer and you to ensure that you own all intellectual property rights in any code they create for you. How can I make sure my app developer delivers on time and on budget? Well, you need to specify that in the contract. So the contract should specify what is occurring at what point in time. And that way, you at least have the contractual mechanism to force the app developer to do things by the time they say they're going to do it. And you can actually have in there performance measures if you want to get sophisticated to basically say, look, dear Mr. App Developer, I need this functionality in the app developed by, say, 1 July. And to the extent you don't have it done by 1 July, then I'm going to not pay you a certain amount for every day that you're late. So you can do things like that. Obviously, an app developer will resist something like that, but then if the costs or the price that they're willing to charge you for the app is significant, then they may actually agree to that. So that is the way to ensure that you can compel an app developer to deliver on time and on budget. What happens if there is disagreement on progress or quality of the work. Well, what happens then is everyone goes to the contract. Everyone looks at the contract and everyone tries to interpret the contract in a manner that assists them. That may sound like a flippant answer, but it's actually what happens. So the best thing you can do is actually be as precise as possible. And I've actually experienced this the hard way. So I got an app developed actually in the fly fishing industry. I spent $10,000 with some guys out of the UK, and basically I just wasted my entire money because I did not, at the end of the $10,000, get an app that was useful, and they wanted more money to fix it. We had a substantial disagreement. There was a contract in place, and this is the weakness with some of these contracts, is that while there was a contract in place, you've got to have more money to enforce the terms of that contract if it goes south. And I actually just decided that I wasn't prepared to do that, and I just walked away from the project. So look, I've been bitten by it, and I'm a semi-sophisticated commercial sort of person. So if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone, and that's just how it is. But as I say, an in-depth and detailed contract will go a long way to protecting you. Next, if you are developing an app, do you need a website for the app? Now, my view is you don't, not necessarily, but I do think it helps, because sometimes if people want to, work out the bona fides or the legitimacy of your app, they'll go and do a search on Google, and it is a good thing if a website appears. But as I say, you don't have to have one. I just think it helps. Okay, so we've talked about apps. We've talked about how you can protect the app in terms of the concept of the app with an NDA. We've talked about how you can protect the IP in the app to ensure that you own it. We've talked about how you want your own terms and conditions, because once you put the app on Google Play or in the App Store with Apple, or even with Microsoft in their store, those terms and conditions aren't going to be beneficial to you. So you want your own terms and conditions. Now let's have a quick talk about what business structure you should use to run your app business. Well, I believe, and this all depends on how commercially successful you think your app's going to be, but it is a good thing to establish a company and run your app through a company. And the main reason for doing that is because a company in Australia is a separate legal entity. And that means separate and distinct from you as a person. And that means that if anyone wants to sue, I'll say you, but if anyone wants to sue because of the app, they actually end up suing the company. And then as long as, if you're a director of the company, because it's your app and so you control the company through your shareholding and directorship, as long as you've acted appropriately as a director, then you'll be shielded from that lawsuit, meaning if they win the lawsuit and the app company has to pay out money and the app company has no money, then the company can fold and that's the end of it. And it doesn't actually come and affect you personally. The only downside really with forming a PTY Ltd, like forming a company, is the cost of establishment, $500 or $600, depending on where you get your company, and then the ongoing reporting requirements in terms of fees you have to pay ASIC each year, and then the fact that you have to get company tax returns done each year. So apart from those ongoing running costs, I think the benefit of a company far outweighs the cost of having to maintain it. And so if you're looking to make some money out of your app, I would definitely be suggesting that you put in place a company. And then you can, behind the scenes, do clever things like you could license the company the right to commercialize your app and charge a license fee for that. And the reason you want to do things like that is because you could then get tax benefits as an individual and get money out of the company that way. But look, that's a bit more complex and probably a good discussion to have with an accountant in due course. Okay. Should I register the app for GST? Well, you need to if you're going to collect more than 75,000. If you don't or aren't going to, then you don't need to register and get an ABN. However, I would say this: registering for an ABN and therefore being registered for GST does show a sense of professionalism and makes the app appear more bona fide and legitimate. It doesn't cost a lot of money to register for GST. So I would consider doing it. Just note that you're not compelled to, or you don't have to do it unless you hit those revenue amounts of $75,000 per annum or more. And that really should give you a good understanding as to how to start an app business in Australia. So let me just quickly recap. You want to have your own terms and conditions for the app. You want to have your own privacy policy for the app. When the app's been created, you want to put in place an app development agreement to ensure that you own the IP in anything that a developer develops for you. When it comes to commercializing and making money from the app, it's a good thing to set up a company structure so that the company is or owns the app. And you may potentially need to register for GST if you turn over 75,000 or more. Look, I hope you found that helpful. If you do have any questions, please feel free to get in touch. Thank you very much.